right, so here's the whole idea, is just kind of like forging the path to promotion. And one of the things that I was looking at when originally I looked at this is, get a better idea of the numbers and the barriers and potential approach. Talk about guidance and the components of it, and then reflecting. And I think the big part is reflecting on where you are in some of these key points that people always talk about when they're looking at going up for full professor. What you can see from the numbers is, so here's a survey that was done in 2012. All the professors, and I have to move my screen a little bit. So they surveyed, almost 14,000 professors at 69 colleges and universities, and only about 45% of the associate professors who were in that rank for 6 or more years disagreed with the statement that there was a culture of promotion in their departments. So what it tells you is that not all departments have actually had a culture of promotion to full professor. I don't think our college did prior to Dean Hill Clark arriving. I think she's worked actively at trying to promote a culture of promotion, but it didn't exist here in the past. And almost 2/3 of the people expressed that they never received any formal feedback on their progress towards becoming a full professor. And 20% said they never wanted to even bother. They never intended to go forward. And you can see that even with faculty that had 6 or more years as an associate professor, in that survey, 40% said they had no plans to apply for full. And that was a study that was done in 2018. So some of it is that we have a large group of associate professors that seem to stay at associate professor, and they don't seem to move. And here are some of the barriers, and they may sound familiar, they may not. The protections on teaching are lifted. Now you no longer have that 1 and 2 kind of teaching load, might be 3 and 3. Service load often increases. It's harder, and grants are more competitive, so they're getting more difficult to obtain. Just general life itself happens, so family life or crises kind of intervene, and you never really have the time or energy or the capacity to put forth the effort to work towards becoming that full professor. You get a new chair or a new dean, and all of a sudden the goalposts move. So on my dissertation committee, after I graduated at Michigan State, there was a new dean in the college, and 2 of the faculty members that were committee members that were junior members on my committee, they weren't renewed, for example, because they were doing too much service and they weren't doing enough of what that dean considered to be the relevant work to advance. There's no clear path to promotion. There's not very much advising, or our advising loads are too high, or there's not much advising or mentoring, or they had a bad experience with tenure and the whole process, and they would never go through it again. And all of those things were amplified for people that were of color or women. So anybody that has any minority status, these things were actually amplified. Another thing is that post-tenure stress disorder, just where people have gone through and you've put forth that effort, almost like in a law firm, for example, where junior attorneys, their responsibility is to bill, work. And you get to that point and you finally get tenure, and all of those other things happen, but it's also just kind of that collapse. And you just can't quite bring yourself to moving forward. So there are some possible solutions for that. And one of them is mentoring, and even just having a discussion like we'll have today is part of that mentoring, but with a formal mentor, informal mentors, formal mentors within your department, or even people that are outside of the department that can help you understand what that process is. So here's one professor's approach that he recommended that all associate professors take when they're considering going up for full. And so one, review the promotion requirements. And right now I can tell you that I'm in the process of reconciling all the faculty promotion and tenure handbooks for every department in the college and the colleges, and aligning them with the university's handbook. So that's something that's actually going on right now. So we can talk a little bit about that, but they're all being reconciled. There are issues in every one that need to be clarified, or something may not be accurate. Look at your teaching portfolio and review that. Consider your whole research agenda and whether or not it needs to be revised, and be more strategic about how you engage with other people. So all these points are just here. And something that he put down that I think is important is supporting others. So I don't know what everybody's experience was as going through just the promotion and tenure process to become associate. I know what mine was, and I also know what my experience was with full professor. And sometimes one of the things that can happen is that faculty or your peers sometimes who appear supportive during other meetings aren't as supportive when it comes up to your own progression in promotion and tenure. I'm just talking and going through these things right now. So here's the colleges, and it's fairly small. The minimum criteria for promotion, you have to meet those. But it's also, you have to satisfy the promotion requirements for your department, your unit, your college. So the college promotion standards are a baseline, and your department or your program expectations can be more rigorous than the college. So one of the things you want to know is, really look closely at the faculty handbook. And something that was different or wasn't really clearly expressed in the past was when you could actually go up. So now in the current university faculty handbook, it clearly says that you have to be in your role for 5 years as an associate before you can apply for professor. And here are the minimum requirements according to the university. They don't, what they don't express, and what they probably need to look at more closely, is what is high quality professional productivity at that national recognition in your discipline. So really what they're going to be looking for is, and that's the thing that distinguishes between an associate and a full professor, is that you have a national or international reputation in your discipline. And how is that actually defined? So here are some caveats. You don't become a professor just because you've been around long enough. You do need to have, a level of achievement that's recognized, not just at the university, but beyond, outside of our university itself. And that teaching excellence and being contributing to student development, if any of these things, you're not teaching well, you aren't providing service, you aren't being participating in scholarly writing or presentations, any of those things, or a combination of all of those things, could prevent you from advancing to full professor. So you're really looking for, you don't have to have excellence at all things, but you have to have a balance so that it shows that you've made enough of a contribution, I guess is the way I'd frame it. And there isn't a metric. And I did see, like in the CPER handbook, and we'll talk a little bit about it, talked about major or secondary accomplishments. But really, it's national or international reputation in teaching, research, any of the three or all of the three. Often it's research and scholarship. Sometimes people talk about how the necessity of having grants in order to become a professor. That's not the case. Some people say you have to written a book to become a full professor. That's also not the case. But you do have to have research and scholarship, and you do have to have service, and you do have to have teaching. And you have to be more than adequate in teaching. So here's the CEPR. And I'm just putting down the really brief description because CEPR's current handbook is pretty detailed and has cut and paste. It looks like a lot from the university's faculty handbook in some sections. So I'll just let you look at that, but basically distinguished empirical scholarship that has national or international recognition. And that can be in any of these areas: articles, peer-reviewed journals, books. And then there's this accomplishments, major or secondary. And I don't know, Leigh, if you remember looking at what the major or secondary accomplishments are. I can pull them up. I have them on another form. But they're kind of looking at it in that way. You have to have adequate or better performance in teaching. Other areas in college, you have to have better than adequate, and you have to have a record of quality service.
So I haven't seen the revised one, so I don't know if what was under major and secondary has changed or not.
Yeah, and looking at major and secondary, I'll pull it up in a second. I have to find the page. But it's quite, give me a second. Any questions so far, Susan?
Yes, I do.
Good.
And this is more like a me question rather than a question that would broadly apply. Like a lot of my work and how I have developed a national and international reputation has been based on my theoretical work and not necessarily on my empirical work. And it's because I'm a theoretical methodologist. And so I get concerned when everything's just like so heavy on the empirical, because that's at the expense of somebody like me and anybody else who might be doing heavy theoretical work.
Yeah, doing theories or developing models.
Yeah, that's my jam, and it has been since I got here. So
they all count. How you do that is in your narrative. When you're writing your narrative, how you frame that, I think, becomes really important. For example, like for me, framing the amount of service work that I do as when I became Dean's Faculty Fellow, for example, or then the Associate Dean, in terms of framing how much time that takes. So my workload went from, teaching 3 and 3 and publishing, and then a percentage of service, like coordinating things, but then it moved to maybe 80, almost, I would say 90% service. And I could teach one course a year, and if I had time, I could publish. That was confusing to people, right? So you really have to be able, because it's not in their experience. They have general faculty don't have a strong idea of how much service is required. So for me, what I needed to do is really write about how that service expectation and demand changed, and hopefully, was able to convey that. You would do the same thing with writing theoretical pieces. You're making that argument that this is where you are and why you're there. Here are some examples of major accomplishments that are included in CEPR. So refereed national or international journal articles, and then they're looking at the quality of journal, and the discipline is considered through impact factors, rejection rates, sponsorship of the journal by a major professional organization, publication in top-tier journals that are considered in your area are considered more of quality. So if you're publishing in a theoretical article in a journal that's a tier, and you have to make the argument there because a lot of the faculty are going to be quantitative rather than qualitative specialists, providing that context for them. Writing or editing a book, these are examples of major accomplishments. Being a PI or co-PI on a competitive research grant, being a guest editor for a special issue of a journal, those are all considered major accomplishments. And the secondary ones, invited journal articles, and that means something that's not peer reviewed, doing a refereed presentation in a paper, writing a chapter in an edited book, refereeing a journal, regional journal article or monograph, getting a University of Memphis faculty research grant, or any other competitive research grant proposal, but it's not awarded. And then they have a whole section of like other accomplishments. CPERS is more detailed than other departments, to be really honest with you. So once this will be posted, and we're reviewing them, trying to get them all kind of cleaned up so they can be posted, hopefully next week is the goal. But those are an example of what they describe as major or secondary levels of accomplishment. So for me, I would really spend my time on my narrative. For example, I know I read your teaching narrative. It's excellent. And you really did a good job of conveying your perspective on teaching and how you approach students and how information informed your teaching. You do the same thing in your narrative about your research. But I understand your concern about, it's empirical, and that's the main focus. The other thing you should know is that so at a programmatic level and within a department, the perspective is going to be narrower. And then as you go further through and get to, so you have the departmental committee that makes the review, the department chair that makes the review, and they all get to make the recommendations. Then it goes to the college committee, who has a little more, actually has a more global view of what it is that you're doing than the department. Then it goes to the dean, who has an even more global view. And then it goes to the provost that has a more global, or I would say almost like a macro view. So even if somebody doesn't think that the theoretical work in one area isn't as important, that doesn't mean that people that are in those positions of authority that are going to be doing that review aren't going to see the value in your work. It's just how you presented the material. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So here are the if you were in CREP, for example, you have to be a minimum of 10 years professional experience, but at least 5 of those years have to be in CREP in order to advance. So if you came there and you had 10 years of experience, but they weren't all with CREP, that's not, as a research professor, not a tenure track, but a research line, you wouldn't be eligible until you hit 5 years. And then again, national or international recognition and consistent pattern of high quality professional productivity. And that could be volume, but it's a lot of times going to be focusing on quality. Here, ICL, very, very similar. Again, you're looking at teaching, research, and service. They're all interrelated. They all have more than one mission. So they're all kind of crossing over and intersecting in some way. Here, teaching, effective teaching is essential qualification for tenure and promotion. And they kind of define, again, research, national, international recognition, but you can see it's not as specific or as CPERS. And then service is considered from our institution and national and outreach. And I'm just kind of covering those broad things. Here's the leadership department, and you can see that basically it's, again, all the same, but they're looking more of your integration of your scholarship when you're becoming promoted to professor, and national or international reputation. And for them, teaching is the core purpose of their department. So there's a difference, slight difference in each departmental recognition. And that's why when you get to like the college level or the college committee, there's a more global perspective because they're all coming from a different perspective on what's necessary or required to become a full professor. So the process is essentially the same. Department reviews all the data, college does, goes to the university. I would start, if you're thinking about going ahead for, I would go talk with Dr. Cogdell about where she sees you in terms of your progression and moving forward to professor. And before you do that, you have to, like in April, for example, right now, they're actually sending out a call in ICL. I just saw it. If you're thinking about moving forward with promotion, you need to let your department chair know in writing. And they actually have to provide that name to the dean. The dean provides that name to the provost, your name. But so I would have a discussion with your chair prior to moving forward to see where they feel you are on your progression and your application. The other thing I would tell you is that if somebody says all these meetings that all these people are having are supposed to be confidential, but trust the promotion and tenure process. So if somebody were to say, well, I think you should withdraw because I don't know how this is going, and it just kind of leaks out from someplace or somewhere. Again, that one area isn't the deciding factor. It really is going to come down to the feedback from the dean, the feedback from the provost ultimately. And then after you get approved at the provost level, it really doesn't become official until like June when the board of trustees actually meets. So there are a lot of checkpoints, and I can tell you that I do know that the dean reads, and I know that Abby also reads, they read everything that's submitted. And so they can pick out something if they thought that it didn't really fit the pattern of what was being said about the person, or if there's some ambivalence within the committee for whatever reason, they don't understand your work. For example, the dean and the provost will pick up on that, and they would address it at their level, regardless of what's said at another level. So if
Hey,
you're
I have a quick,
yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question. So, okay, I was tenured in 2019, so conceivably I could start the process a year from now.
Yes.
When should one, meaning me, initiate these conversations with Pam? Should it be now?
I would seek it out now. See, what I think is people get so caught up in everything that they're doing. And if you're already tenured, a lot of times people don't have the time. They don't think about taking the time to have that discussion. So I would start now.
Okay.
And the reason is because you can at least get feedback, and you're getting some mentoring, right? You're getting some perspective on where you are from the department chair. So the department committee's opinion is one thing. The department chair carries weight. The college committee carries weight. The dean's opinion carries more weight after evaluating what everybody said. The provost's opinion carries the most weight, but I would have those discussions.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason is because you want to be able to start the discussion and thinking about going up. What do you, and get her perspective, get Pam's perspective. You can withdraw if you're going up for promotion up until the time that you meet with the dean, and the dean is telling you her recommendation. You can withdraw at that time if you feel like your application isn't strong enough. And then if you do, you have to wait at least one full promotion cycle before initiating promotion procedures again. The other part is the appeals process. An appeals process right now in the faculty handbook is fairly clear, but I can tell you that I have been called in in my role to testify regarding somebody's promotion and tenure being denied. So I had to go and sit at the faculty senate door along with a number of other faculty, the dean, myself, and with the applicant there, and be questioned about what I thought about their opinion. Now, my opinion for one person where I was called in to testify was, I think, basically supporting that that person should have been promoted. And I disagreed with the opinion. Ultimately, that person was promoted. So there is this whole process where I want to make sure that, you know, you understand that even if you think it's not going well, if you trust the process, there are people there that are going to speak truthfully about what they actually believe. And a lot of times people prevail. Here's what you have to consider, though, you know, since it's just, you know, you, Leigh, and you, Susan, you know, what's the CPER department and its culture right now? How does your department encourage you to actually go work towards promotion to full professor? And is it the right time to apply? Have you established that national reputation? You know, if not, when would you decide, or how would you actually decide the time is right? I think for me, these are probably the more important things, is how do you decide? You know, right now the university's on this, they've become R1. I think there are a lot of questions in terms of faculty mindset, what that actually means. And, you know, how does that weigh in when for basically the entire time that you've been here, we were a tier 2 university and now we're tier 1. Does that mean everything just suddenly changes, or is that context taken into consideration within your department? So those are questions that I would have for you to think about. Is it the right time? How do you decide when is the right time? Is going forward now a better decision than holding off for another 2 years? What will change in 2 years? And that's where that kind of reconsideration or revising your strategy and how you set yourself up for promotion. And that's really what I'm trying to talk about today, is how do you start setting yourself up for promotion? How do you actually start looking at what's needed? And if you're not there and you have time, so that you're forging that path now instead of waiting until the last minute and just say, I'm going to throw my hat in, and now you have to reconstruct your entire, you know, whatever you put in for your associate professor promotion and tenure process, you don't have access to it any longer. If it was submitted through the dean's office, we don't have access to it any longer. So you're creating all this time, and there's a big investment in time, trying to make sure that it's the right investment in time. And if it's not, then what do you do to recalibrate in order to make it a better time for you to get promoted? There's a small pay, it's small, relatively small pay benefit in getting promoted, but it's still an increase in pay. So it's worth doing it from that financial standpoint. If, as a professor, if they're looking at exigencies, full professors are less likely to be touched than somebody that's an associate, that's an assistant or a new assistant, or, you know, at that lecturer kind of assistant professor of teaching or a clinical role, because you do have tenure. So advancing in that way also matters, and it matters over time in terms of salary. So I have a whole bunch of resources in terms of articles that you can look at, and maybe developing. I think what I'm trying to advise is that have a plan for doing it, have a strategy. Where do you think you are? Is there anything that you would have to do in order to update or maybe recalibrate where you are in that process? So yeah, you have to wait the 5 years. Now, in the last handbook, they said that a person could go up more or less at any time, and they didn't have it clear, you know, even for people that were here or coming in with a year towards tenure that they had to go through third year review. So a lot of people thought they could get that year early, so they would actually be applying for tenure or promotion earlier. So here you have to have that 5 years, basically. They've made it really clear. When I originally was talking to Ernie Rako and Dean Wagner, and I think Doug Stromer was still here, they told me that in order to become a full professor, I had to be here I had to be in academia for 10 years. And then I checked on that in the last cycle, and it wasn't that clear. And because of the lack of clarity, people still were able to go up. And the people that went up for full professor did get approved. I think there were 3, but they probably wouldn't have fallen. Now they would not be able to apply because they weren't within 5 years, haven't served 5 years as an associate. So I am open for any other kinds of questions about where you know, and we can go off the recording at that point if you just want to talk about where you are.
Yeah, do you want me to go ahead and stop the
Yeah,
recording?
yeah.
Okay.